So all of our videos are really exciting and different, but today we're doing something really, really exciting and really, really different. And that is we're setting up an aquatic environment for the waterwheel plant, or Aldrovanda vesiculosa. If you've never heard of that thing before and you've grown carnivorous plants for a long time, don't feel too bad because it's actually really endangered in the wild and pretty rare in cultivation, and it can be very tricky to keep them long term. We've done it here for probably like 2 or 3 years, I feel like, and we've learned a lot of lessons. I would say we still don't have it perfectly dialed in. They have a very narrow niche in the wild where they grow, uh, which is like 6 to 8 inches of very tannic, very cool, very pure, low nutrient water. And they'll grow like hugging the shore and around other plants, and they just free float, which is really weird and surprising. And they're actually related to Venus flytraps. So, Venus flytraps have this weird aquatic relative who also has snap traps, but they're very small, and they use their small traps to catch things like water daphnia, mosquito larvae, tiny little things like that. So when people would come to the nursery asking to see the Aldrovanda, and they're picturing these giant monsters because they've only really seen little videos online, well, here's a lot of Aldrovanda right here, floating with some sphagnum moss, and they are a very small plant. So, you know, they're not the most impressive looking right now either. They go dormant in the wintertime. So a lot of places where they grow, the water will freeze, and they need to do something to avoid that ice. So they make a little dormant bud called a turion, and you can see the remnants of that at the tips of these plants here. That's what that little bright green thing was. And it's just a very, very tight bud of aquatic leaves all pushed together. They lose their buoyancy, they sink down into the mud, and that's where they hang out underneath the ice in the mud as these little dormant turion buds. And then in the spring, when it thaws, they all float back up and they start to expand out to form their carnivorous leaves. And they're just now starting to do that now. And they're still kind of in their transition mode. So you can barely maybe see some very first little traps there. We're going to do a check-in video when we get this thing set up later, so you can see what it looks like. And then also, as they keep growing, what's going to be really fun about this is we'll keep checking in and showing you them when they look really nice and perfect. Hopefully we'll get there. Today we're just going to talk about the setup. And so far, this is what I have. I've got this kind of barrel-sized little pond liner that we have laying around the farm, so I'm just putting it to use today. I wasn't actually super expecting these plants to show up so fast as they did. So sometimes you have to kind of work with what we have. And then it's good to plant some other plants in there with them. That's going to kind of create a living ecosystem, give them some other little places to hide from some of the direct sun. And it also is like oxygenating and just creating a nice living environment. And they appreciate that. And as their old leaves fall into the water, they're also kind of creating tannins and breaking down. And as you can see, I've already put a bunch of oak leaves and some pine needles down in the bottom of this liner. And then I'm going to top it off with a little bit of sphagnum on top, just to kind of hold it down. And then our soil mix, you don't need very much soil. The Aldrovanda are soilless. They never have roots, and they're never going to root down. So the soil is mostly just to hold the tannins and the peat moss, and maybe allow our companion plants somewhere to grow. And this is a little rush, a curly rush, juncus. And this thing they called floating heart. I am not a water plant expert, so I forgot to check what the Latin name is on this guy, but we can look it up and probably put it in the little thing below. There it is, I bet. Thanks, Daniela. But any little water plant will do. You just want something to kind of, like I said, give a little bit more of living activity, offer up some shade, maybe suck up some excess fertilizer that's building up because you don't want that to build up. And the real tricky thing can be algae. When we lose them in the past, it's usually just some big algae bloom that entangles the plants and then they super disappear. And that's usually what happens. So we're going to use some algicide, and we'll let you know how that goes to see if we can get around that. I'm putting it in a sunny exposure, but also a place where the afternoon sun is going to cut out, because the less light there is, the less algae bloom there'll be. So we're hoping it might still happen. But we're going to do our best. And that's kind of the fun about experimental horticulture like this. And we've been doing that our entire lives, is figuring out how best to grow these plants so we can teach you. I'm not saying I have it all figured out. So if there's some people that have more experience with this, we'd be eager to hear your comments and about it. But, this is our best we can do so far. So anyways, back to our soil. I've got some peat moss getting super soggy over by these weeds. That this peat moss floats until it gets really, really wet. And so I have it soaking in distilled water over here until it loses some of its buoyancy. And then I got this aquatic plant soil at the same place that I got these plants, which is actually Caesar's Fish in Santa Rosa. And I'm going to mix this clay with the peat moss, probably about 50-50. And then I'm going to put a layer of pine needles and oak leaves on top of that, a little bit more sphagnum on top of that. And then I'm going to top dress with this really beautiful aquarium gravel, which I'm hoping is going to hold all that stuff down there. And then we're going to slowly fill it up with water so that it doesn't all get disturbed. Obviously, we dump all the water in, it'll just become a big, horrible mess, floating with leaves, and that'll be a mess. But what we're going to do is just slowly let it fill up, kind of like probably with a leaky drip level over the rest of the afternoon, so we can get it totally full up with water. Then we'll introduce our little Aldrovanda, and hopefully we'll have a really nice setup for you to check out tomorrow when Daniela comes back, and we'll do a video of that. Another thing that's really key, and your local mosquito abatement people aren't going to like me saying this, but mosquito larvae actually really help the situation. We work hard to keep mosquito larvae out of every other reservoir that we have here. But on these, I'm going to let them ride, because the mosquito larvae not only graze on the algae and keep the plants clear of that, but they will also become food as they're grazing the Aldrovanda. They often get their heads stuck in the trap. And so most of them will be food for our plants, but the longer you can keep mosquito larvae growing in your environment, in my experience, will lead to long-term success with Aldrovanda too. Again, don't tell the mosquito abatement people I said that. And you probably want to leave fish out of it. These are pretty small plants anyways, and fish could definitely start to eat them. They're going to add more nutrition. I'm sure there'll be some visiting frogs in here before we know it. Probably some tadpoles, although we're getting a little bit late for tadpole season around here. Anyways, I hope you guys are super enjoying learning how to grow these plants. I know we are. We're also excited to see them grow. They even make little flowers, although that's very rare. And they almost never make seeds. They do make seeds. They're like probably superfluous. Yeah, probably like at this point, like an extra way of reproducing. Like those seeds would stay in the mud and, offer some reproduction. But the most part, these guys are just like growing long stems that branch and then breaking apart. So kind of more like a traditional water plant. They're just growing like crazy and splitting all apart and filling up the water surface. So although they do flower and make seeds, it's rare and probably not their main way of reproducing. Anyways, we'll check back in tomorrow and hopefully have it all set up.